It's so good to see you today. Yeah, so I just want to introduce
Likewise.
Chloe. Just if you could just give us a little summary of what it is you do and in the space of relationships and intimacy.
Yes, I'm Chloe Phemeral, and I'm a sexologist. And I really focus on working with people. I don't have a good phrase for it. I just say outside of the norm or outside of the box or anything along those lines. Because I work with people who are neurodivergent, queer, from the broad spectrum of queer, gender diverse, non-monogamous, and kinky, or any one of the above, or any combination of the above. So my clientele tend to be one of those things or more, and we work on intimacy and relationship issues with that as a primary lens.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much. And I would love to today, I want to like create a special focus on neurodivergence because I know this is also a really big part of your work. And I'm just curious, could you maybe just tell us a bit more about your journey with neurodivergence and how that shows up for you and in your work?
Yeah. I'm one of those people who went a very long time undiagnosed and not having any idea. Like my impression of what an autistic person was. I worked in a summer camp when I was young, and there was a non-speaking autistic teenager, actually brothers, both. Um, and they were sort of the classic historical definition of autistic in non-speaking, very difficult in terms of social integration in the group and things like that. And so I thought, well, obviously I'm not autistic. And ADHD, my impression of ADHD was the classic 80s definition of the bad boy in the corner who couldn't sit still. So again, I didn't think I had ADHD. So it wasn't until I had a son who was diagnosed when he was around 7, I think,
Mm, okay.
ADHD, that I started doing a ton of research and reading and following all the social media accounts and going, huh, I mean, I know a lot of people can have some of these traits and it's normal, but I seem to have a lot of them. And oh, look, there's different versions of what this is like. Oh, and it's really different in girls. Oh, and it's really different with trauma. Oh, and it's really different when you are high masking. And so it was a journey that took me probably 2 years to come to terms with the fact that I might actually also be neurodivergent. And then I did all the testing, and it was like, oh yeah, scoring very high on both of those. Um, and it's funny because a lot of people debate whether you need to get diagnosed or not, and whether self-diagnosis is legitimate or not. And for me, knowing the labels, I'm a super anti-label kind of person in general. I don't want to fit into any box, but uh, it's been really, really helpful because a lot of things that I used to be incredibly self-critical about, I can now be much more objective about. And instead of hating myself for forgetting things, okay, I still hate myself for forgetting things sometimes, if I'm honest. But most of the time, I can at least quickly get to the fact that, okay, it's ADHD. You're not a horrible person, and you try. So,
I love that. There's so much to unpick there, but if we just rewind quickly, I would love to know. I know that there were some incredible studies and statistics about how it shows up in women. Would you like to drop into that a little bit? Because I know it was discovered much later for how it shows up in girls, right?
yeah, on both sides, right? So, well, the thing is, I think what's really important to explain from the beginning is that a spectrum is a really misleading word.
Mm,
So, both, I would say both, first of all, autism and ADHD are very overlapping Venn diagram circles in terms of their traits.
mm,
And there is not just a line from, somewhat maybe autistic to very autistic. Like, that's not how it works. It's much more like a spider graph. If you've ever seen those graphs that looks like a spider web, and then like you have a rating scale of being close to the center or close to the outside of like increasing difficulty with that thing, right? And so then around the outside, you might have things related to sensory processing or uh, like social emotional capacities and communication and all these different things, and people struggle with different aspects of that.
yeah.
So the original assessments of these in boys tended to overemphasize specific traits that are more common in boys, particularly with ADHD, on things like hyperactivity. So ADHD is also a super misleading word. I think it's the worst terminology that could be used to describe the thing. It's actually much more about attention regulation and sensory regulation. And hyperactivity is one trait, but it is not a required trait, right? So this shift from ADD to ADHD to incorporate hyperactivity was actually almost worse. And also, it's not a disorder. It's both of them, neither of them are something wrong with people. They are literally just genetic diversity. They are diversity in the way that our brains operate. And that has characteristically mischaracterized women and girls because we tend to show up differently. So oftentimes in the ADHD example, it's more common to have the inattentive type. So rather than hyperactive, where we have a harder time, like, again, regulating our attention according to what neurotypicals would define as appropriate regulation of attention.
Oh, I can feel there's a big sting around, like, yeah, exactly, just it being different and not something wrong with you, right? There's a big emphasis on that. And I love the example you're using of like, there's so much to unpick, but I think just for people who are really coming entry level here, like, what are the ways? I mean, and also non-attentive could show up in little boys, right? It's
Oh,
not,
absolutely. Absolutely.
you don't have to even oppose like the two. It's just, you
No.
know, like the spider web you're saying, like some things we have more difficulty and we can pick one thing from the other on the spectrum, so to say, right? So it's a mix and a match of different qualities that can show up in different people. So
Absolutely. I don't even believe in the gender binary. So, you also have a lot of
exactly.
thing there that is overlapping with other identities. There's a lot of intersectionality here.
Yeah, and just out of curiosity, like how would you say, what has been the most challenging part for you of how it showed up in your life? Because I know it's so unique to everybody and everybody's like mix of how like neurodivergent shows up is so different for everybody, right? And I really want to like emphasize on that because I feel like it's also really unique to each person, even within this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think my biggest struggles are with sensory processing.
Okay.
And um, I have a lot of there's a lot of other additional diversity that comes with it that I think impacts very much how I relate to people, which we can dig into more.
Yeah.
Um, and I have a lot of the difficulty regulating attention. So I'm very, very good at hyperfocus. When I want to hyperfocus on something, I can sit there and do it for 12 hours straight.
Mm.
But if I don't care or I don't want to, it's physically painful to force myself to do things. So things like administration and bureaucracy are extremely difficult because they're so tedious and they're so time consuming, and I don't want to pay attention to them. It can be really difficult. And
I mean, that's just like, that's so beautiful. I'm sorry for interrupting you, but just like if you think of, if you start with sensory, what does that mean?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm a kid
People
that
on the outside to get a better understanding, right? Because I think that
mm,
helps a lot, right? I know I have lots of people in my life who are on the spectrum, and I think if I could have more understanding and tools to understand them, it would be really helpful, you know?
yeah, it's have you ever been trying to focus on something and there's construction noise and
Mm.
like you cannot focus on anything because the construction noise is so loud. It's like making it so you can't hear the other person on a phone call or like you can't. Yeah, that's probably the best example that could be related to most people. If the construction noise is loud enough,
Yeah.
you're not able to focus on what you're saying to another person, right?
And neurotypical people might be able to switch it off and just
No,
be
no,
like,
no. I'm giving an example for a neurotypical person, like a point where a neurotypical person would be bothered by that,
"Mm,
right? Take that experience, and now it's literally equally distracting to have a tag that itches,
mm, okay.
right? Or I'm hot, or I'm cold, or I don't like the shirt I'm wearing, or the
Mm,
music is too loud, or there's too much background noise. And
mm,
I can't separate out sounds. So if there's 10 people talking in a room and I can hear the other people, one of
mm,
the things that most people can do, which I've only learned recently, is something that most people can do. I didn't know it was a thing. I didn't know that people could choose what to listen to, right?
okay.
Like if you're in a crowded bar You can choose to listen to the person you're talking to and somehow filter out the noise of everyone else. I cannot. I hear them all equally.
Yeah.
Plus the sound of the machine that's making a beverage, plus the scraping of a table on the floor, plus somebody watching a TikTok over in the corner without headphones. I hear them all equally. So it's extremely difficult in crowded or noisy spaces for me to function at any level because it feels like that level of construction noise.
And I imagine it also being exhausting, right?
It's exhausting to regulate, right? It takes every ounce of focus I can possibly muster to maintain a conversation in those places. And so, in my life, I've done a lot of conference attending and networking events, and they tend to be very noisy, and people are drinking, and yet that's where the real business often happens. And so, having to do business in an event where I can barely function because I'm using every ounce of my attention just to hear what the person is saying, let alone to think about what's happening and etc. It makes what your average person might be tired by. Like, okay, if you're a neurotypical introvert, you might be tired by that scenario and afterwards need a lot of rest or still hate being there because you just hate that kind of an event. But it's really a recipe for burnout very, very fast for me in an environment like that.
And just out of curiosity, what are the things that kind of like help you in those situations, if there is anything, what are the things that like, yeah.
Well, this is where we get to, is it a disability or is the world disabling?
Mm,
Right? And I think that the reality is that neurodivergence is not a disability in and of itself. It can be, certainly. I don't mean to undermine that position because there are people who have severe enough challenges in certain ways that it becomes very disabling. But I would say the majority of the challenges with neurodivergence are disabling because we're in a disabling environment, right? So I am unable to function in that kind of a place. But is that because I have a disability, or is it because we live in a world where it's perfectly okay to blast music at a volume that is actually already damaging to people's eardrums and then expect people to have a conversation over a beverage in that place, right? So the way that it's better is to really think about, like, I mean, it goes all the way into construction design. If you design a room to hold 500 people and it's carpeted, like many hotels are, it's going to be a much more friendly environment, and like soft lighting, it's going to be a much more friendly environment for me than a room of hard surfaces where the sound bounces everywhere, right?
Or a
And
key thing coming up for me, and that is like, the one thing is like, if that hasn't been the case yet, what can you do? Like, do you have like something in your toolkit that you can like anything that you can kind of like feel like you can help you regulate somehow in those situations? And then the other question would be, what could society do, right, to construct itself differently, to be more inclusive, right, for all of us?
I mean, I'm a huge fan of restaurants with booths, with spaces that have spaces,
Yeah.
right? So spaces where you have, room dividers and things like that that help break sound.
Yeah.
And so it's things like that that can literally be designed into a space to make them more friendly. Also, please get rid of overhead fluorescent lighting. I just want to shoot all of it. Like, I literally work in the dark in my house 90% of the time and sit in front of a window where people can see me if I'm working online. And the rest of my house is dark because it's dark space in general, and I refuse to put overhead lighting. I won't turn on the lights. So
Okay.
in my own space, I can control the level of noise. I can control the level of lighting. And those things really, really help me. But if I'm in a public space, to be honest, I just don't go. Like, in most cases, if I get invited to an event and I know it's going to be at a really loud bar, I just don't go.
Okay.
Uh, and there are, knowing my challenge, if it's something that I really want to attend, and
Hmm.
I'm motivated for some specific reason, or I need to be there. Obviously in life, sometimes we're just required to be there. Knowing that I'm going to have trouble with it, like, the there's so much marketing over like different what do they call them? They're like little earbuds, but they're not
Um,
full silence earplugs. what are they
Yeah,
called?
noise canceling, right?
Yeah, like noise reducing or noise canceling, like, so you can wear something like that that helps reduce the noise. Um, because you're going into something where it's going to be a problem. And if you learn nervous system regulation, because I also think that oftentimes when we're neurodivergent, we tend to have a pretty narrow window of tolerance to our nervous systems. Like we're fairly easily pushed outside of a zone that we can regulate. Um, you can actually learn to increase that, even when neurodivergent. You can learn to increase that zone of tolerance.
So from a
So,
somatic perspective, there are practices
exactly.
that can help you to increase your capacity, right? So what I'm hearing is like when the world forces you into situations that don't include you and that aren't inclusive of what you need, right? There is like noise canceling things, and also avoiding situations where you know you're going to be in things like organizing your life in a way where there are places where you feel like you've been taken into consideration, basically, right? Yeah.
Yeah, which is also a super, super privileged thing to say, right? I recognize that for a lot of people, that's simply not possible to do, right? I mean, if you don't have a choice but to work in a fast food restaurant, because that's where you could get a job, especially as a neurodivergent person, we have one of the highest rates of unemployment
Mm.
because we often can't physically handle it is often a sensory issue. Sometimes it's a communication issue, right? Like we haven't talked about the way that we communicate and what people call social challenges. And I would say it's society that's the problem, not us. But anyway, um, we often get fired because we're too direct, or people think we're saying something that we're not, or what have you. And so it can be very, very difficult to find work as someone who's neurodivergent and keep work as someone who's neurodivergent. And so I am in a very privileged position to be able to create a life that works for me. And that's simply not the case for a lot of people. And it can mean severe burnout, and it can mean a lot of life instability because it's very difficult to find work that will accommodate those needs.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. That really puts like a pain in my heart. And I don't think we realize always standing from the outside what an impact it can have on people, right? And I saw another statistic the other day that I think 69% of people who have ADHD have more chances of becoming addicts too, right? There's a
Absolutely.
lot of that. There's so much to unpick. But if we had to move through, you were also talking about masking. If you could just like highlight that for people and how that shows up for you, just as
Well, I wanted to
so many
just
things I want to mention, but yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah.
I'm going to answer that question, but I want to say something first about trauma, because I think one of the difficult things as well is that for a lot of neurodivergent people, it can be difficult to separate out the symptoms, if you will, or characteristics of CPTSD, complex PTSD, which is something that develops from ongoing and sort of long term, whether it's attachment issues or abuse or what have you over time in families. Um, they can have similar outcomes, right? So, and if you're neurodivergent and you live in a world where people would never accommodate your needs, didn't know what your needs were, weren't diagnosed, families didn't know how to deal with you or thought it was normal because they also had undiagnosed neurodivergences and they got by just fine. Um, you have these both intergenerational trauma and trauma that can come from those experiences of a child of not being listened to, not being heard, not being understood, being punished for not acting how you should, like this very behavioralist approach. Most
Shamed, rejected, all of that, right? Yeah.
so then it creates attachment wounds. Attachment wounds are what really create substance dependence in many cases. And so you have this very complex thing. And I think everyone can learn to mask, but it is also extra common in people who were raised as girls because we are taught to serve the needs of other people culturally in many cultures, right? And so and girls tend to be more socially aware. So even if you have social challenges, which again I would like to come back and fight that term, um,
Please do.
the the reality is that you learn to mimic, right? So I've gone through a long stage of unpacking. It's been really, I would call it almost like reprocessing of trauma, because for a long time I really didn't know who I was as a person. I was a chameleon. And
Mm.
to this day, I can enter and mimic what other people are doing. And to the point that after living for 5 years in Thailand, I was leaving, and this collaborator in the Thai government was like, "Oh, I'm gonna miss you. You're so Thai. Like your mannerisms are so Thai," because I can learn what someone does, what they visually do. I'll
Mm.
never understand their thought process, but I can see what they do and I can mimic what they do.
Yeah.
To the degree that, like, in relationships, I would
Mm.
adopt the interests of the other person, right? And also I'm ADHD, so I'm always interested in something new. So if I can learn something new, I'm gonna ask the person I want to learn about it because it's something shiny and new. So there's a legitimate interest,
Yeah.
but it's never going out and asking myself, what do I want to do? It is now, but it took me a very, very long time to be
Yeah.
able to say, this is something I'm legitimately interested in, not just something that I'm picking up so that I can mimic, so that I can fit in.
So there's like an unpicking and a reconstruction process in there, similar to people who are hypervigilant, right? You grow up with parents where they walk on eggshells, so they become hypersensitive to their environment and they're constantly over adapting. And when they do come into relationships, they meet people and be like, oh, you're so easy to get along with, right? But then
Exactly.
they wake up and like, who the fuck am I in this, right? So
Exactly.
and I think about that a lot because I definitely grew up incredibly hypervigilant, So boundary work and somatic work has been amazing for me to like find myself in that. And people are like, oh, you get along with people so easily, right? But there's a part of that where you can also really easily lose yourself, right? So
Yeah. And
over.
that's what I mean about the overlap, right? It's just because you're someone who is a chameleon and, can fit into different situations doesn't necessarily mean you're neurodivergent. It's a character trait of trauma.
Mm.
It's a character trait of hypervigilance as well. So we mask for different reasons, and there are also overlaps in many of these things, right?
Yeah.
Oftentimes, people who are neurodivergent have that kind of trauma because they were so different as kids.
Yeah, and I would love to know because our focus really is today's relationships and intimacy. Like just from a relational perspective, how has this impacted your life? Like in
Mhm.
relationships, let's say from work to love to friendship to whatever it is.
Yeah,
It's a loaded question, but yeah, just if you could touch upon it in whatever way you feel comfortable. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I've sort of hinted a few times at other diversity, right? And I think another thing that is more common, recent studies show, is statistically more common in neurodivergent communities to be queer, gender non-conforming, non-monogamous, kinky. All of these alternative identities are more common in
Mm.
people who are neurodivergent. So the number one thing is that I don't love like most people love, or maybe more people would if they had a more open mind. But yeah, let's just say that I fit in all of those communities, right? And so, number one, I have learned that I need to craft my own existence, right? The neurotypical script, and I would layer again on patriarchal script, and societal script and cultural script. It doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for me, just like that loud bar doesn't work for me.
And
Um,
this is why I feel like this conversation is so important because I want to understand how we can be more inclusive of
mm,
the script and what isn't working for people who feel like they don't fit the script, right?
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, please go ahead and just like if you can think of ways and showing us, and saying,
Yeah.
you know.
I mean, it's really hard to give specifics because I think everyone is different within that. But, and some more like specific things that are often correlated with autism and ADHD. I am easily distracted. I'm not going to remember things. So I've had a lot of conflict in relationships over people saying, I told you blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I have zero memory of that.
Mm.
Right. Like I was hyper focused on something else. You chose to talk to me at that moment. I will not process what you're saying to me if I'm hyper focused on something else.
So just out of
Or
curiosity, if your partner or whoever is talking to you, when you are hyper focused, what would be something that would be helpful in that moment?
so
Yeah.
I have learned, here's the thing. I've also understood that I don't have relationships with neurotypical people, which just doesn't work. So all of my partners are also neurodivergent. And that's not like a selection bias. I don't go out and try to find other neurodivergent people. I meet people, I'm attracted to people, I find out they're neurodivergent, right? We tend to be magnets to each other.
And this could also include OCD, right?
Absolutely. No, there's many, many other neurodivergences, right?
Yeah.
I have a son who's epileptic. That's also a form of neurodivergent. So yeah, there's, you know, it's not only autism and ADHD, there's many other forms of.
Just to keep that in mind for people, because like OCD is like a very different combination, right? So there's a lot out there. But yeah, you were
Yeah,
saying if like with communication and stuff, when you are hyper focused and somebody does talk to you, to break it down for people, what would be the best for you in that moment?
thank you for bringing it back. Um, so
It's
my
great to
point,
listen to you, but yeah, I'm trying.
I had a point with my divergence there, which is that because I am in relationships with other people who are neurodivergent, who are aware of their neurodivergence, we have many, many, many conversations about these things, right? So one of the things that we are exceptionally good at, many of us as neurodivergent people, is direct communication. And so you have direct communicator and a direct communicator, and especially if you've learned to process your triggers. And again, there's a lot you can do with somatic work in learning to feel your triggers and learning how to process your triggers. And I've done a lot of work on that because I used to be someone who exploded very easily. But with work, I've gotten to a point where I can identify that I'm not pissed off at you, I just can't hear. Or I'm not pissed off at you, I'm hungry. Or I'm not pissed off at you, I'm hot. And, you know, so when I have a sensory issue that's going on that's really high, it narrows my window of tolerance. But now I can actually recognize where those are coming from and communicate them. So
Right.
in that example from earlier, I can say, I'm hyper focused, I won't remember, just a minute. And the great thing with my anchor partner is that he's exactly the same and also hyper focuses. And so we have, you know, we have a whole, we have a real understanding, and it'll just be like we literally don't speak. It's just like, give me a minute. There's no words. There's just, and then we focus and we finish our thought, and then we come back and we say, okay, tell me the thing.
Okay. So just out of curiosity, doing two things at the same time is very hard for you.
I can't switch. It's difficult to switch. So even in that moment, I might be annoyed to be interrupted and have to manage, like, okay, this person, you know, and we'll, the thing is, we've gotten to a point where we give each other as much space as required, right? So, you know, if we're sharing a space that day, for example, when we're working and somebody's like this, I don't interrupt again until the person comes to me, right? And that's what I expect in return. Write it the fuck down if you have to. Or I mean, only if it's truly urgent and needs to be dealt with now, do you come back and interrupt now. Otherwise, you write it down and you come back to it when the other person's done with their day, right? And it's just, that's a level of, I mean, it requires obviously a lot of communication and a lot of talking about what works for you and what doesn't work for you, and understanding and observation of where that other person is. And those are skills that can be built. They are not inborn, especially when we have a narrower zone of tolerance.
I love that. And I think it's so useful in general. Like, I love the sign, you know, I think that's even like,
Yeah, and it's one finger up is the sign in case
you might mean something else, you know, and this one might mean something else. But yeah, there are signs, right? So I love that. Okay. And I'm just curious, like, also, so not doing two things at the same time. And like the fear of rejection is quite elevated in people who have ADHD. Like there's rejection fear or something like that that I've read a lot about. Is that
everyone. Yeah, not everyone, but it is common. A rejection sensitive dysphoria is the term that is used.
yeah.
And yes, absolutely. Which is interesting that a lot of us end up gravitating to non-monogamy because you deal with a lot of that. But at the same time, somehow I feel like it's made me better at rejection.
So it's increased your capacity too, right? So it's like,
Yeah, the awareness of it has increased my capacity, right? And again, it's one of these things, like I never would have chosen to be dealing with any of this, or especially the extra challenges that my son has. And yet, because of my son, and I have absolute compassion for him, I have learned how to navigate these things in order to help him, and in turn have managed to dramatically increase my own ability. But yeah, rejection sensitive dysphoria combined with trauma and attachment and hypervigilance and things like that can be a really difficult thing to navigate, because it means that something really simple could feel like death. And I'm not exaggerating, right? Like the idea that, and that whole thing, like that whole hold up a finger just a minute, I can't talk to you right now. is an example where if you haven't talked about that first and very much been on board with it, it could feel like rejection. And that rejection could be the level of, this person is done with me, they're going to break up with me, this relationship is over. It could be that level of seriousness.
No, but I have a lot of people in my family who have ADHD, and I can physically see how that rejection sensitivity almost feels like a gut punch, and the person is sort of like feels mortified, like they're going to die almost.
Exactly.
It like you can physically
that
see it in
level
the
of
body.
nervous system response. Your nervous system is literally going into a fight flight state, or even potentially a shutdown, like freeze, fawn, lay over and die state of this person. I am being rejected by this person who is so important to me, right? Like my son, for example, will, he wants to be good at something. So he'll ask, am I good at something? And you'll be like, well, yeah, you're good at it. What do you mean I'm good at it? What do you mean I'm good at it? Because he took the fact that I didn't say you're the best in the world at the thing as rejection. I am bad at that thing, and therefore I am bad because I think this thing is important. And so if I'm not the best, or at least the top 10% or something at that thing, and you're not enthusiastically saying I'm in the top 10% of that thing, then you don't think I am that thing. And that thing is very important to being a good human. And therefore I'm a bad human. And it sends him into a panic.
So it's all those layers, right, of the trauma on top of the sensitivity on top of so layered, right? So there's a lot to unpick. But then on the other side, there's also the communication style of people who are neurodivergent sometimes that can be quite harsh, right? For some people standing on the other end.
It's interesting because I'm not on the other end. I don't know what it's like on the other end, right? And in my view, and it's interesting, this comes back to my whole, I want to debate the whole social challenges thing, right?
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
Because in neurotypical society, in general, and this obviously depends dramatically on culture, and Americans, many Western Europeans tend to have a more direct communication style. And others have much more nuanced communication style. But typical communication is not necessarily very direct. So to give a very classic example, you say, how are you? The correct answer is, I'm fine. But why? Why? I'm not fine. Why would I tell you I'm fine? And if I ask you and you say you're fine and you're clearly not fine, then my alarm bells are off and now I'm hypervigilant, because why are you saying you're fine if you're not fine? Clearly you're not fine.
You're not somebody, I'm not somebody you can trust, right? Because you can see that I'm, you're not
exactly
feeling.
Now I can't trust you because you're not honest with me. And honesty and directness and justice tend to be very, very important. Again, not everyone, but especially within a lot of autistic people, justice, a sense of justice is very, very strong. So, and that connects obviously to honesty and what have you. So it's a good example of like, am I struggling with communication because you're not honest, or are you just not honest?
I would say that there's like a melange, right? Like,
oh, absolutely.
Honesty without kindness is also hurtful, right? So,
absolutely.
But there's so much masking, right? And even in the way people show up in their relationships, in society, in public, in everything that's acceptable, but actually people are not okay, right? So there's so many ways.
But and I think another challenge for us on this side of the coin is that oftentimes we're just honestly answering a question or making an observation, and being correct and accurate tends to be very important. And so I have offended many people in the workplace in the past because they had an idea and I would shut down the idea because I didn't think it was a good idea. And I have learned over the years to have more nuance and to appreciate the good elements of what they might be saying while still making my case of why I don't think it's a good idea. But I think we're not, and again, obviously there's a wide range here and it plays out differently with people, but I feel that neurotypical communication is very indirect and has many layers. And, the sort of classic trope of teenage girls being like, oh, he said this, what did it mean? It might have been this or it might have been that. And there's like 30 layers of the potential intent behind it when really he just meant, are you busy on Saturday? Whatever it was, right? I'm not thinking about that. I'm not thinking about the 50 different ways you might perceive what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to do is communicate accurately.
And just out of curiosity, when you have a doubt about what somebody's saying, would you go into that whole analytical mode and interpretation mode, or does it not land the same for you?
I do. And again, this is different because I think there are a lot of neurodivergent people who very much obsess over the 50 different ways, but we do it because we know we might be misunderstood, right? Or we've had so much experience of saying something that we did not intend to be harmful, and then someone starts crying, and you're like, I have no idea how I offended you. Like, I literally don't know what I did to hurt you.
Yeah.
Why are you so upset? And then they learn from that to be hyper vigilant of other people's reactions and think through the 50 different ways that someone might appreciate something. But then I often don't speak. I will choose not to speak at all if I don't know how to explain it in a way that I think will land okay to the person.
Yeah. Okay. So that's something you've learned over time, you would say.
It's a form of masking or learning. I don't know which one you would call it.
Okay. And this has come over time with like being in a similar situation and noticing that like this potential situation, something harmful has happened before to the person standing in front of you. So there's a part of you that kind of steps back when you're not sure.
Yeah, I mean, and it relates as well to, I think, another struggle that's really common, which is emotional regulation. And I think a lot of times autistic people tend to get labeled as cold or unemotional, and ADHD people often get labeled as overly emotional or, hyper emotional. And again, those are not always true. There are lots of different traits, but those are often perceptions. And actually, I think many of us are hyper sensitive to emotion. And the challenge isn't not noticing the emotion, it's internalizing the emotion, right? We become emotional sponges to other people. And so we say something that we had no intent of being negative. Someone receives it negatively, we feel it deeply. And that's where a lot of the rejection sensitivity comes from, because we can feel that person is not okay, even if we can't necessarily attach it to a specific emotional word, right? Because it can also be very difficult to describe emotion, but we can feel the reaction of your nervous system. And again, this is me, and there are many of us like this, not everyone, but
of course. And then out of curiosity, I'm just very curious, somebody who has autism, it's not that they just like cold would be the word you used. It's not that they don't have feeling. It's just they have a really hard time expressing them, right? Would you say
they
that?
express them differently. They express them in a different way than your average neurotypical. I wouldn't necessarily say, like, yes, it's a struggle, but it's a struggle because it's misperceived, right?
Can you maybe give us examples of how that could show up? Yeah, because
for a lot of autistic people, they don't have the same facial or tonal intention, right? Or look, right? So there's a lot of communication that happens through facial movement, and a lot of autistic people don't have the same amount or slightly different facial movement. So a lot of the, oh, you look up and to the right, it means you're lying, or whatever it is. I don't know which direction. Is just wrong. Like, that's how I think. I think by looking up in a way because I don't like eye contact when I'm thinking. So it's an example. I'm just saying that the cues that we have to each other are often misread because our cues are different. Are your cues right and my cues are wrong? I don't think so. I think they're just different. And we often, it's like speaking a different language to each other. And the other challenge that a lot of autistic people have is they don't have a lot of tone regulation, or it's hard for them to hear the impact of the tone. All right. So they might sound frustrated or argumentative when they have absolutely no intention of being frustrated or argumentative, right? They're just trying to get a point across, and they are often misunderstood. So they've got 30 reasons lined up why the thing they're trying to say is the thing they're trying to say. But people perceive that extra information as arguing.
Right? I kind of feel super heartbreaking because you know, I've studied like behavioral gestures and face things. Like if you notice people who smile and who smile from their eyes, they convey warmth and all of these things, and just feeling how exclusive,
And
how
wrong.
excluding that is to people who are neurodivergent, right? And all
It's
the
just
norms
not the
of
same.
what is acceptable, right? And like how you can play with the tone of your voice to be more charismatic, or, you know, and for some people it's just not an option, right?
Yeah. Sometimes they just don't hear it, right? That's not something that I personally struggle with, but I know people who do. Um, many people within, particularly, I think autism, I'm not sure as much in ADHD, tend to have this, either they don't hear the tone or they can't hear their own tone,
Mm.
or that tone doesn't have the same meaning, right? And so, or sometimes it does, but the root of the thing is different, right? So if we're discussing something and you're not understanding what I'm saying, and I'm now going to go through my 20 facts of why I'm saying the thing that I'm saying, and you're getting frustrated with me because you think I'm arguing, then
Mm.
my tone is gonna sound frustrated, but my tone is not frustrated because of the original thing. My tone is frustrated by the fact that you're getting frustrated with me when I'm not actually arguing. I'm just trying to explain myself, which is
Mm.
super interesting because I'm guessing right now I sound activated.
Yeah, I can feel there's like more sort of like a frustration and an exhaustion of like the, yeah, I feel like more the misunderstanding of it, right? That feels exhausting. Like, you know, I don't know if that lands, but that's the, yeah, and I can totally see why. I mean, it's just horrible if I think about how through centuries and time, like we studied the norm and like neurotypical people and how they're just so included, but then there's a whole pot of other people who's nothing is the matter, but it's been totally excluded. That's horribly frustrating, right?
Yeah, I mean it's interesting, right? Because in most science, you will often disregard the extremes because there's some unexplainable difference. It's not, meeting the trend of the bell curve. You've got 90% of people here. Therefore, the natural right thing is something inside, the bell. And if you're not, then you're just excluded even from the results because those are, they're not consistent. So we'll cut off the study here, right? And it makes better outcomes. It
Yeah, and
makes,
it literally breaks my heart because it's like 20% of the population, right?
yeah, you've got
It's
10%
like
here, you
it's
got
like
10%
actual
here.
human beings that are just like not being included in anything somehow because of that for so many reasons, right? Which is terrible. Yeah, and another thing I would love to drop into is sexuality, you know, and intimacy. Is there any parts of that it feels like sort of like that you have your own language for that people might want to know more about or that you would like to explain and explore?
Yeah, again, I don't know if I've ever been in a relationship with a neurotypical person. So that experience of neurotypical to neurodivergent relationship, I think can be really, really, really challenging. Again, because of all of these differences, right? So if you communicate differently, if you have different sensory needs, if you have different ways of processing information, if you have different ways of focusing on different things that are important or not important, um, you have somebody who's really like wanting to follow the general societal script and somebody who doesn't understand the point. You end up with a lot of conflict. And of course, I think the other thing that people often misunderstand is that because there is so much diversity within neurodivergence itself, you might not be neurotypical, but doesn't mean you're the same as any other neurodivergent person, right? So those things still play out a lot. And what I find really challenging in particular is actually the parenting relationship, where if my kid has different sensory needs than I do,
Mm.
and we both have very strong sensory challenges, that can create a lot of difficulty, right? And so, or with my ex-partner, we had, I would argue we were more brought down by the anxious attachment, avoidant attachment personalities downward spiral than anything else. But we did also have
Classic, a grand classic, yeah.
exactly a very classic one. Uh, we also had different neurodivergent needs that made things really challenging, right? Like she's very sensory seeking. And so, she always wanted to play loud music in the car, for example, where for me, it's really hard I can't focus on a conversation and music at the same time. And so it's interesting, ever since we split up, I literally don't listen to anything in the car. Because that silence is so precious to me and I so rarely get silence.
Oh, this is so beautiful, Chloe. I would love to have like more lists of examples like this because I feel it's so helpful for people to understand this, It's so,
Yeah.
I think it's like, and I know that it's different for everybody, but if we could start having more examples of how it's different for each person who's neurodivergent, like it gives us just such a
Yeah.
open mind of consideration, right? And how we approach things, and also not to experience it, like just really keeping that in mind makes such a big difference, right? And creating awareness around it, it's huge, right?
Well, and I think people just, they hear that, okay, there's sensory processing issues and there's social challenges. So, okay, that person might be a little bit weird. It's fine, they're autistic. But it really impacts absolutely every aspect of our lives to a point that can be make or break, right? So, for example, again, doing the laundry, right? Doing the laundry is doing the laundry. Like, okay, couples have conflict over laundry, but it tends to be because one person does it and one never does, right? So I'm not talking about that. This is a conflict over the laundry where one person has a very, very specific view of how it must be done. You must separate the whites from the colors. You must do it on this setting. You must load the machine to this level. You must use this detergent. And by the way, it can't be any other detergent because I need it to be non-scented and I need it to be hypoallergenic. And the other person, so, that let's just say that this one is autistic and this one is ADHD. I can barely get laundry done ever. It never gets put away. I do my laundry and it goes on the drying rack, and then my drying rack is my closet and I live off the drying rack. My dishwasher is the exact same way. And it doesn't get done again until I have no more clothes in the drying rack, right? The number, the percentage of clothes that ever reach it to my closet are extremely low. So if I was with a person who had really strong views on how the laundry must be done, we would be a nightmare together. It's such a minor thing, but it's not a minor thing. And that's obviously one example, but it's literally everything that we do in our lives can be that specific or challenging.
That's unbelievable. Yeah, that's such a beautiful way to think about it. And I'm curious, like, yeah, how do you feel about structure? As a how does it work for you? Does it not work for you? Some people who have ADHD have told me they absolutely love structure and they want so much of it in their lives and it's so helpful. And other people are like, oh, how does that work for you?
I am this I'm the epic combination of AUDHD, right? So both. So I have a desperate need for structure and consistency and cleanliness and calm and silence. And then at the same time, I'm completely incapable of achieving them. So I'm really, really good at designing systems.
Okay. You're like,
In fact, I've done a lot of work in my life designing systems, but I cannot keep them. So I tend to create a new structure for organizing my life. I have been on Monday.com. I have been on ClickUp. I have been on Asana. I have been on my notebook. I have been on the bullet journal notebook. I have been on 500 different other task list apps. And I will absolutely spend 3 days hyper focusing on creating a new organizational system and then never touch it again.
wow. Okay. Wow. So how does that translate into your daily life? Like, what does that look like? Feel like?
Well, I'm not going to give that example. Never mind. I struggle. I miss a lot. I forget things. People get angry at me for forgetting things. I actually had an experience recently in a group conversation where somebody was talking about how rude it is when people are always late. And you can forgive them once, you can forgive them twice, but after that, they're the problem. And I said, well, you might consider that person is neurodivergent and life happened and it threw them off. And, you know, there they find themselves taking an important call from their car on the side of the road because they didn't want to miss it again. There's also something called the ADHD tax, because we end up paying a lot of, we end up paying for a lot of things twice, or late fees, or, you know, not canceling with enough notice and therefore having to pay for something we didn't access. And so that happens all the time. Like, and oftentimes if I tell myself over and over and over, like I'm in a position where I can't take a note of something, but something happens and it's very important, I will tell myself, don't forget the thing, don't forget the thing, don't forget the thing, don't forget the thing. And then it will be the one thing I forget out of a list of 100 because I put too much attention onto it somehow. And therefore it got put in a pile of attention, but then it got put in the wrong attention pile and in the forgotten pile, right?
Oh,
So,
yeah, totally.
but my point
I
is
mean,
that
that really just feels like I can just imagine that. I mean, that is so much, right? It's tough. It's tough also, right?
there's so much self-judgment that
Yeah.
goes into, and people reiterate it, right? So in this conversation, when I said, hey, you might want to consider that this person might have ADHD, they said, well, in that case, I can't work with them because that will be too triggering for me.
Yeah, and I would love to know your thoughts with that because like I mean you hear like all over self-help people saying like if somebody wanted to they would have whatever. It's not true. It's
It,
not true. You could die to want to do it right and be there on time and get the stuff done, but it's just not happening, right?
I will never resolve the fact that I forget things. I will never resolve the fact that I have time blindness. I will never, or like but and yes, we can learn things that help us, right? I put everything in my calendar. It has a million different warnings, right? Like reminders that come up. Um, I'm very careful not to overschedule my day if I can help it so that I don't, you know, lose momentum of things, but I cancel on people all the time because I don't have capacity. I think 2 weeks from now, I'm going to be able to meet you for dinner, but then I'm completely burnt out that week because life happened and I'm exhausted, or I forgot something else and I got reamed for it. And I can't show up for you tonight. And
Mm.
so I cancel, and I have lost relationships over that, right? Because I don't have the capacity. And I could, you know, I can communicate very openly and
I'm
directly.
guessing what people's take on that is like, well, the person's never on time, so I'm just going to stop waiting and I'm going to stop asking, right?
Exactly. Or I'm not going to invite them again because every time I invite them, they say yes and then they cancel last minute.
Yeah.
And then if we don't get invited, we think, oh, they're not inviting me because I didn't show up last time, even if that had nothing to do with it, right? So then
So
we
there's
start
that sensitivity around that thing, right? That's always there.
rejection sensitivity comes in, right?
On top of that, yeah. And
Yeah.
how would you say, like, do you have any kind of like ideas of how you've learned to deal with that over the years in your relationships? And like how that is kind of like the communication you've had with people or the things that you might say to like create like a framework around that that works for you?
Yeah. I mean, I think everything in relationships, regardless of what neurotype you are, comes down to communication, and comes down to knowing yourself, right? And so as the better that I know myself and the better that I know my strengths and weaknesses, the better that I know that the reason that it's so difficult for me to remember things is because, did I hear you in the first place? Was I hyper focusing on something else? Was it told to me in a state when I was regulated or dysregulated? And did I make a note of it? Did I make a calendar event for it? If I know that all of those things matter to my ability to show up, then I know to communicate at the very first step that I'm sorry, I can't hear you right now. Or you can tell me that right now, but I'm driving a car and I can't make a note. So don't, that I will not remember. You need to email me, text me, or tell me at another time. And okay, that's annoying because I'm making someone else do the labor. But if
Mm.
you want me to remember it, that's the way it's going to have to go, because I'm driving right now and I'm hyper focused on driving and I will not remember that thing. It just won't. I can't. So, but again, it comes down to the fact that I know that I can communicate it. I can communicate it calmly. And then when I do get something else from that person, I can immediately put it on both my written list and my calendar, which is on a certain day with a reminder. You know, my Google Calendar is intense. I have 7 different calendars all linked together. that have different things on them, and they all have warnings, and I still miss meetings sometimes.
Yeah.
But you know,
Yeah,
so
exactly. And
it's
I love that. But I love that. So it's also coming back to like knowing your capacity, knowing yourself, and really saying, like, if you love me, know that I love you, but this is the kind of communication I need if we're going to make this relationship work for both of us, right? So yeah, this is kind of like the
exactly.
communication. And I also just want to celebrate how beautiful it is, because the self-knowledge you have to be able to, it like forces you to also discover. And I work so much with people, like you said, whatever kind of neurodiversity you might have, or not even, communication is the key, right?
Exactly. And
So,
that's the funny thing. You know, it's true about most disabilities. Right? Like all the ramps that exist anywhere that people use to wheel their luggage over or drive their bicycle over or whatever, they only exist because of disability rights activists who made sure that there were ramps to things because of people in wheelchairs. And look, it benefited everyone,
yeah.
right? So in most cases, adaptations that help people help everyone,
Yeah.
right? Having quieter bars is really nice for a lot of people. You don't have to be neurodivergent to hate a loud bar. Like it's really nice to have a quiet atmosphere for a
Yeah.
lot of
I mean,
people.
I'm at the point of my life where I leave a bar when I can't have a conversation anymore, right?
Exactly. So
That's where I'm at, you know? Exactly.
yeah, and okay, it might be mixing with a whole bunch of old folks who also really like quiet, calm spaces with jazz in the background, but at least it exists and I can go there, right?
Yeah.
So that's the thing. These things are, we have unique challenges of existing in society, and yet most of the things that would make society better for us would make them better for a lot of people. And the things that can help us adapt and communicate and have better relationships are also the same. It's knowing yourself, knowing your own challenges, knowing your own triggers, knowing how to come back from those triggers, and knowing how to communicate and have a conversation about them. And that benefits everyone for sure.
Absolutely. And I love, like, there's so much, this is so helpful, Chloe. Thank you so much. I mean, even I'm learning so much, but just when it comes to like regulation, what is that kind of, how does that come into your life when you think of your nervous system? Because I know we both work with the nervous system. How does that come into play? And another thing that I also just want to pick on before I forget is that I feel like I tend to see a lot of people who are neurodivergent who kind of feel exasperated and so sad because they still want to try and fix themselves. So there's this thing of like non-acceptance that I feel is very strong. And coming back to the capacity, they don't want to communicate their capacity because they still have some kind of feeling that it's going to be different this time.
Well, let's be realistic. There's no, okay, technically, in many countries, there are laws that you can't fire someone for a disability, but you can find a million other reasons to fire someone. And if you're neurodivergent and you're not great at communicating kindly, then you don't get fired for being autistic. You get fired for being mean to your coworkers, right? And I don't know what my point was,
Yeah,
but
that's great. That's another point. We were just talking about like accepting your capacity, being able to communicate.
yeah.
But that's
So a
super
lot of
useful.
people,
Yeah, just before you carry on with that, just to see is like, for example, if you know you're not good with admin and you're running your own company and you're neurodivergent, instead of every day trying to do your own admin and bumping up against the same wall, from the go-get, if you knew your capacity and you accepted it, you would be, I'm going to outsource that. Would that be something that you would consider, or does that not land?
it does and it doesn't. And it relates to what I was going to say, which is that for a lot of people, it's a risk to expose themselves, right? So to be able to explain your capacity, you have to be able to explain why.
Hmm.
And to say to your employer or your colleagues, I have ADHD,
Hmm.
is to tell them a lot of things that they will have judgments about, and they will now look at you differently. And so I may not explain my capacity to them. I may be in a complete state of burnout, burning at both ends, completely incapable of keeping up with the 50 balls that I have in the air. But I will not tell them that I'm beyond capacity, because if I did, I would have to explain myself. And if I had to explain myself and tell them I have ADHD, now they're going to
Hmm.
think that I'm lazy. Potentially, they're going to think that I can't organize anything. They're going to have, all these negative biases that exist, you're handing to them on a plate. So
And in,
people
and in
choose not to
general, yeah, and
communicate.
in general, vulnerability is hard, right? It's hard to be vulnerable. It's like saying I'm not good at something, regardless of your, like if you're neurodivergent or not, it's still really hard to expose that part of yourself. And people can use it against you, I'm guessing, right? That's a fear.
That is absolutely true and a very privileged way of seeing it.
Mm,
It's not only about vulnerability, it's about potentially losing your job,
mm,
right? And so I know neither of us lives in the United States, but as an example, and this is true in many countries, if you're not performing, they can fire you on the spot that day, right?
yeah.
And so a lot of people don't have the privilege of
Mm,
vulnerability if that vulnerability would reveal something about themselves that is more likely to get them fired, right? Or lose their kids in a court battle, or anything along those lines. Like, it's not just uncomfortable personal vulnerability, it's literal life vulnerability, the vulnerability of losing work, of losing your spouse, of losing your kids. Like, there are examples where that happens, and because of the very negative perceptions that exist of people, and it's shifting a bit. I would say you're most likely not going to lose your kids over being ADHD at this point, not for that old,
yeah, yeah.
right? But it gives a certain impression of your character as a person that is not necessarily positive, right? It's not like saying, oh, well, everything's going to be okay now because you do that because you're neurodivergent.
Mm.
Definitely not, right? There is still a very negative connotation to many of these things. OCD in particular, not exactly well perceived, right? Um, I
That's
don't
so heartbreaking. That's terrible because, yeah, there's like two axes to that, right? Like you're also like exposing stuff that might be potentially very dangerous to your future. And then also just the hardship of actually being open, especially in a workspace, right? So those are two things that are really tricky, you know? Yeah.
so yeah, some of it is just,
Mm.
and there are, like, you can learn strategies for communicating some of these needs in a way that doesn't have to be revealing of your diagnosis, right? You can say, like, it's perfectly, well, I mean, I would still say, arguably in capitalist society, it's very difficult to say, I feel burnt out, I need less on my plate. That is not well perceived in most workplaces. Maybe it's okay in France, but not most other cultures, right? And even in France, it can be challenging.
Yeah, and I mean, in France, you always say don't give them the stick to beat you with, right? So vulnerability is not something that's very cherished in France, you know. Showing your weakness is not something we admire at all, right? It's not like, hey, oh, really? Oh, okay, let's all like work around this, you know. It doesn't work that way. So I can see how it's challenging for sure, you know, it's very difficult. And then if you think of like having knowing your capacity, accepting your capacity, and finding ways to communicate it without necessarily having to like expose yourself fully. Is that like an option?
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, there are a lot of things where you can do that, right? So, you need a darker office. You can advocate for that, right? Or you can bring in a sweater if it's cold or whatever. I'm just, these are very work-based examples, but there are accommodations that can be requested that don't necessarily have to be identified, or we can talk about our needs with people without necessarily having to reveal a diagnosis. And again, the better that you get at identifying and understanding your own needs, and the
Mm.
better you can get at communicating them in neurotypical kindness, which is a skill that can be learned even if you don't understand why, or you think it's stupid.
Okay.
You know, it is
These stupid
possible to.
neurotypical people. Oh my word.
I have nothing against neurotypical people.
No,
I
I'm joking, but it's kind of really unfair, right? Like, why should you have to learn to speak like them, but nobody's speaking your language, right?
is that's how the world works, right? And we can learn ways of doing these things, and we can get better at them, even if we don't think we should or need to, right? So yeah, and there are a lot of great coaches and people that can help on this, that are either about general neurodivergence or about specific relational neurodivergence and sexuality.
Absolutely. And I'm just curious, just to come back to the point I was making about like, if you could speak to people who have ADHD, who have a real lack of acceptance of where they're at, maybe on the journey, in anybody who's neurotypical in that regard, and what would like we see the importance of knowing your capacity and expressing it in ways, what would be the message like to feel like more accepting maybe, or what would you say is the word to help them move forward to be able to get more of what it is they need, basically, right?
Yeah, really, it's spending a lot of time. And if you are able to work with a professional to get help on that, I think it's incredibly useful because basically I gained a new special interest of nervous system regulation and neurology and neuropsychology and somatic approaches, and spent 3 years of my life deep diving into all of these things. I'm not saying you have to go that far, but um, even with just a little bit of work, working through, like when I started this, I could not name my emotion. I didn't know. It was extremely difficult for me to talk about anything personal. I just wouldn't with anyone. My first therapy session was silence, incredibly uncomfortable silence, because I didn't know how to do it and I didn't know what to say and I didn't know how to communicate emotion. And I now work with people on that and can empathize with anyone, right? You can get there. It requires really getting to know your own nervous system and throwing out all of the guidance that you are given from most people, but working with someone who understands both neurodivergence and the nervous system to learn how to sense for you, because some of us we don't feel feeling in the same way. We might think in pictures instead of words. We might think in colors. There might be synesthesia. So anger is red for me, and I can identify that I'm angry, not through how most people would identify that they're angry, but identify it because I literally feel red, right? So there can be lots of different ways of perception that are different. But if you can get to know your own nervous system, understand what it feels like when you're triggered and where that trigger comes from, is that trigger coming from trauma or is it coming from a neurodivergent characteristic? You might never know the difference between those two, but the more you can unpack, just the knowledge that this thing is common in people with ADHD helps me forgive myself for it and helps me recognize that it exists, and then helps me plan strategies, both from a nervous system regulation and communication perspective, but also from just like a little literal administrative strategy of how to manage those things. So it would be great if the world could adapt to us, but it's unlikely to happen anytime soon. And yes, we should still be advocating for accommodations and for acceptance and what have you. Some of these skills are useful regardless, and getting to know your own nervous system and how to communicate about your needs, your boundaries, your capacities is incredibly useful for everyone. So it's highly, highly recommended.
Oh, you're amazing. And I can't wait to learn more about what it is you're going to share about this, because I find it fascinating and incredibly helpful. And I also think, yeah, that's what I love about somatic work so much, is it's so tailor-made and specific to each person. There's not like a step-by-step program for everybody is different, right? So what you're going to need and understand about your nervous system is totally unique to you, right? And that's why the extra added on help of somebody who's aware of neurodivergence is so beautiful in this context, right? Because it's so helpful. So I'm just curious, where can people get hold of you? What are you up to lately? How can
Yeah,
people?
I want to just say one more thing, because
Yeah,
we
go for it.
started to touch on sexuality and then we ran away from it or got distracted down some rabbit hole that I started talking about. But I just want to come back.
I've loved all the rabbit holes. No, no, no. You know? And if
Uh,
you like, we could even do another one about sexuality. I would love to talk to you about that, but please say what
sure.
you want to say. Yeah.
Yeah, just in a very brief, right? I think there are a lot of challenges when it comes to relationships and sexuality itself, because we also tend to have more divergent sexuality, which doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be some hardcore kinkster or anything. It can just be there are certain sensations that work for you and other sensations that really don't. And if physical touch is difficult, then obviously that can make sexuality very difficult. And so again, the more that we can understand ourselves, the more that we can understand the things that turn us on, to allow ourselves to fantasize and get in touch with ourselves and understand what do we even want? Do we want sexuality? Do we want romantic relationships? Because asexuality is also a thing, and that's okay.
Yeah.
We can learn to identify the desires that we have and that we are looking for in our relationships, and learn how to communicate those, and find people who are a decent match for that, and how to, communicate and find ways that we can overlap and what works for you and what works for me. Because there can be a lot of sensitivity. There can be a lot of either hypersexuality, which is also a term that I would debate, or at least, it's not problematic per se, and hyposexuality. And different sensory needs, different desires that are potentially unique or are challenging within the relationships, and within being able to have the sex life that we want. And so again, working with someone on that can be incredibly helpful, because you can work on identifying what your actual desires, needs, boundaries, etc., are, and how to communicate them with people.
With
But
the added on neurodivergence, I mean, I work with that with people who are maybe not neurodivergent per se, but with,
potential for everyone.
and yeah, and I can see that, and I can just imagine if you have that like sensory sensitivity, like if
Exactly.
you're living it from a distance, you imagine having somebody next to you, actually in your body, on your body, touching you, and they're doing something that like literally wants you to like scream because it's so not what you want. Knowing that is like really important, right? I can just imagine adding on the rejection sensitivity to like the push
Yeah.
of it being like a visceral response, right? How all of that can be super helpful in
And
connecting.
even like the emotional processing differences and how that relates to handling these kinds of difficult conversations, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
again, these skills are really, really useful for everyone. But if you are able to work on them in a context that is appreciating of the neurodivergence, and also be able to understand how your neurodivergence affects your sexuality, and then how to communicate that with people, it can be so incredibly helpful to having the kinds of relationships and interactions with people that you actually want.
That's beautiful, Chloe. I appreciate you so much for doing this work, and I want you to just keep on sharing and talking about it because I think the world needs it so much.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I also just want to drop into the fact, like, I feel like there's a lot of stigma around neurodivergence and people self-diagnosing and people like thinking that they are and then they're not. And then like neurodivergence kind of gets a bad rap, right? And then we tend to say, oh God, I don't want to hear about it because we're just shrugging it under the mat. But then there are people who are really neurodivergent who really need to hear this and need like the exposure and the light being shed upon what it is they're going through, right?
Here's the thing. People tend to identify with something
Hmm.
because they have the characteristics. Now, again, a lot of the characteristics of being neurodivergent are general human characteristics. It's just that we have more of them, or we have them to a more extreme level. You can not like loud noises as a neurotypical person, but for me, it's literally disabilitating, right? Like I cannot function in that. I can't tolerate those situations. And again, that's one characteristic amongst many. So, but at the end of the day, does it matter?
Mm.
Like for me, the label matters because the label helps me dive in and understand it more. And because I understand it more, I understand myself better, and it helps me interact with people. But if someone who isn't ADHD identifies with a certain set of characteristics that are common in ADHD people, and that allows them to understand themselves better and communicate their needs better, does it matter?
Mm.
Right? This is all about understanding ourselves. So you can get as annoyed as you want with quote unquote overdiagnosis, which I don't think actually exists.
Mm.
But even if that were the case, and 10, 20, even 50% of those people aren't actually the thing, they are still understanding characteristics about themselves that helps them understand themselves better. And if they can also then say, okay, how does that help me learn how to communicate better, how to express my needs better, then we're making the world a better place, regardless of whatever their actual diagnosis should be.
Yeah, and I still think there is so much to be said and exposed and expressed and learned about this field, and I think it's really, really super important. So thank you so much for what you're doing. I appreciate it so much. I could talk forever,
We could talk forever, forever,
but
indeed.
I think we'll definitely do a part two on this one for
Have
sure.
no idea what time it is, so I'm probably time blinding my entire afternoon. But anyway,
Well, I'm
yeah,
glad you spent your time with me. I'm super grateful. I don't know who else lost out on you, but I'm very grateful. Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
Chloe, that was amazing. Thank you so much. Yeah,
Yeah,
just
to answer your question, though, at the very end, I'm Chloe Phemeral, and you can find me at somanowa.coach, which is SOMANOWA. Samawa.
I will connect it
How
in
do you
at the
spell that?
bottom. We can put
Soma.
all the information on the post I'm going to do, and I'll also
Not
give
coach.
your Instagram page, which will be
We
helpful.
don't need to post that part. That was really funny. I can't spell it.
I mean, you know your own name, which is great. That's essential, and the rest we can add on there. Don't worry about it. Yeah.
Yes, cool. Anyway, thank you. Super fun, and I hope I didn't take your entire afternoon.
No, you're good. I loved it. I learned so much, and I think this is such a good track you're on. Please keep doing this. Like, just really simple examples. My brother's ADHD. My mom is ADHD. I think my eldest brother is too. And I don't even know. I don't have a proper diagnosis for them because I don't even know all the things. But really keep on talking about this because the hardest thing is their personal relationships. My nephew just got diagnosed. He also is epileptic, also has ADHD. And it's hard. It's really hard to understand what their universe is like and to understand what their world is, you know? And I know
No,
it's not the same, but I really feel like we should be having more conversations about this. And just the nitty-gritty is so useful, you know?
yeah, for sure. Yeah. It's life is complicated, but yeah, definitely.
Oh, my heart. And what are you guys going to do something fun over there today?
No, well, we're here because of a work conference, and Simone is blowing up at the moment. Like, if he's right about this thing, it's potentially like Nobel Prize worthy. So, it's things are very, very intense on many levels. But anyway,
And
yeah, I have my
and
certification thing, and yeah,
what time
maybe
is that?
at 7.
Okay, will you let me know what happens? If she
Yeah.
tortures you, if she makes you wait 2 days, let me know. Okay. Yeah, if you feel it, I would love to know what happens. Okay, just send me a little message. All right.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.
Bye, lovely.